Good evening, everyone. So, our first topic in this semifinal period is we will be talking about distinguishing and constructing various pen, paper, and pencil tests. In this chapter, it is more concerned on developing paper and pencil tests for assessing the attainment of educational objectives based on Bloom's taxonomy. When we say paper and pencil test, it can either be selected response or constructed response types. In selected response types, it includes true or false items, multiple choice type items, and matching type. While constructed response type of test, it includes enumeration, completion, and essays. And then we will be talking about this type one by one. And also reminder, the construction of valid test items begins with a table of specification. And when planning a test and construction of table of specification, there are different steps or important steps in planning. The important steps in planning for a test are the following. First is identifying test objectives or lesson outcomes. Next is deciding on the type of objectives test to be prepared. Then, preparing a table of specifications. Then, constructing the draft test items. And lastly is the tryout and validation. So first, identifying test objectives. When we say identifying test objectives, it is an objective test if it is to be comprehensive, must cover the various levels of Bloom's taxonomy. Each objectives consists of a what statement of what is to be achieved, preferably by the students. So, for example, we want to construct a test on the topic subject verb agreement in English for a grade 5 class. The following are the typical objectives. So, again, what are the different levels in Bloom's taxonomy? We have the knowledge, the comprehension, the application, analysis, evaluation, and synthesis. So in making these objectives, for example sa kaniya, ang sa knowledge nga makuha nimo para nga makonstruct sa test is the students must be able to identify the subject and the verb in a given sentence. So naa na siya sa kanang knowledge dapat naka-align siya sa knowledge nga objectives. And then sa comprehension or sa understanding, the students must be able to determine the appropriate form of a verb to be used given the subject of a sentence. So, sa application pod niya is the students must be able to write sentence observing rules on subject verb agreement. So, gi-apply or gi-application sa students nga siya nagguy mubuhat sa sentences. Then sa analysis niya nga type of objectives, the students must be able to break down a given sentences into its subject and predicate. Sa evaluation nga test objectives, the students must be able to evaluate whether or not a sentence observes rules on subject-verb agreement. And the last one is synthesis or creating. Ang makuha sa niya nga test objectives is the students must be able to formulate rules to be followed regarding subject-verb agreement. So, the second important steps in planning a test is deciding on the type of objective test. And the test objectives guides the kind of objective test that will be designed and constructed by the teacher. It means that aligning the test with the lesson or objective outcomes. For example, for the first 4 levels, we may want to construct a multiple choice type of test while for application and judgment, then we may opt to give an essay test or modified essay test. At all times, the test to be formulated must be aligned with the learning outcomes. So this is the principle of constructive alignment. And always remember, ma-align yun ang imuhang test sa imuhang lesson objectives para na-validity or valid ang imuhang gihimo nga test kay kinahanglan align gid siya sa imuhang learning outcomes. And this is the principle of constructive alignment. Next important steps is preparing a table of specification. And when we say a table of specification or TAS in short is a test map that guides the teacher in constructing a test. And the table of specification ensures that there is balance. So dapat na ay balance ang imuhang between items that test lower level thinking skills and those with tests with higher order thinking skills. So, ang imuhang again balance. So, ang imong test should be able to assess all the domains of your learning, which is the cognitive, the affective, and the psychomotor, and the hierarchy of objectives. Dapat mabalanse gikan sa imuhang mga domains of learning, which is the cognitive, affective, and psychomotor. And the other one is mabalanse pod ang iyahang test items gikan sa lower or lats, gikan sa lats hangtod sa HOTS or HOTS or higher order thinking skills and lower level thinking skills. Lower order thinking skills, yes. Or alternatively, a balance between essay and a balance between easy and difficult items in the test. And the simplest table of specification consists of 4 columns. First is a level of objective to be tested, then statement of objective, then item numbers where such an objective is being tested, and a number of items and percentage out of the total for the particular objective. So, it is shown below. So, kani siya. Ang imuhang level, which is the recalling or remembering, then understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, creating. Sa imuhang recalling or remembering, ang imong objective dito is identify subject verb. So nandiha. Then sa understanding is to form appropriate words for that certain sentences. Then applying, sa applying, imong objective is to write sentences observing rules on subject verb agreement. Sa imong analyzing is to determine the subject and the predicate. Then the evaluating, sa imong evaluating is you have the objective which is to evaluate whether or not a sentence observes rules on subject verb agreement. Then the last one is the creating. Ang isa objective nimo sa creating is to formulate rules on subject verb agreement sa item numbers also. Ang ihang item numbers is kanang pantay ra gud siya, wala siya kanang way nagsobra, way na kuwang, bali pantay ra gud siya or align. Tag lima aron mabana or mabahin nimo sa level sa imong objectives. Mabahin sa level og sa imong mga different objectives. Then the next one is the constructing the test items. So again, the table of specifications guides the teacher in formulating the test. And as we can see, the table of specification also ensures that each of the objectives in the hierarchy of educational objective is well represented in the test. Because without the table of specification, the tendency for the test maker is to focus too much on facts and concept Kay naip kung kanang wala tay table of specification na ay possibility nga ang ato ang mga test items mag-focus ra sa usa ka level. So, that's why imo gina siyang kanang patas or imong ibahin-bahin sa level of understanding or learning or objectives, like para makagain or maka-enhance sa skills or understanding sa students sa ilahang lower order thinking skills o sa ilang higher order thinking skills. Dili lang mag-focus sa usa or dili lang mag-focus sa imong higher order thinking skills sa imong mga test items, kundi maka-focus sa gyud or maka-focus sa duha. Bali mag 50-50, maka 50% mag-focus sa lower thinking skills, then 50% pod nga mag-focus sa highest or higher order thinking skills. Cause constructing test items based on a table of specification can ensure alignment man sa imong learning outcomes and assessment task. Next is constructing the test items. So, the actual construction of the test items follows the table of specification. As a general rule, it is advised that the actual number of items to be constructed in the draft should be double the desired number of items. For example, or for instance, if there are 5 recall level items to be included in the final test form, kung na ay 5 ka-recall or knowledge nga level, then at least naasay 10 level or recall items should be included in the draft. The subsequent test tryout and item analysis will most likely eliminate many of the constructed items in the draft. Either they are too difficult, too easy, or non-discriminatory. Hence, it will be necessary to construct more items than will actually be included in the final test form. And lastly, or the last step, is the item analysis and tryout. The test draft is tried out to a group of pupils or students. The purpose of this tryout is to determine the following: item characteristics through item analysis and characteristics of the test itself. It's valid, reliable, and practicality. Why? Why do we need to test it? Para makaibaw ta nga valid or accurate ang imuhang gimo nga test, and reliable or magpakita og consistency and stable ang result nga makuha, and practicality para makasave sa time, sa money. Kay if you make a test nga dili align sa imuhang learning outcomes or objectives, it means makakas ka sa imong oras sa paghimuan ng sayop nga test kay wala man nag-align sa imong objectives. That's why it is practicality na lang yun nga dapat i-align na lang nimo ang imong mga test sa imong learning objectives para makasave ka og time, money, ug ang imong effort. So now let's talk about constructing selected response type, which is first includes the true or false test. And when we say true or false test, nara siya duha ka option. It's either true or false, right or wrong, yes or no, good or better, and so on. Then, in this type of selected response type, nani siya guidelines. Mga guidelines to need to follow. Rule number 1. Do not give a hint in the body of the question. So for example, the Philippines gained its independence in 1898 and therefore celebrated its centennial year in 2000. Obviously, the answer is false. Why? It is because 100 years or centennial year from 1898 is not 2000, but it is 1998. And rule number 2, avoid using the words always, never, or often. and other words that intend to be either always true or always false. For example, Christmas always falls on a Sunday because it is Sabbath day. Statements that use word always are almost always false because a test wise students can easily guess this test. It's and there's a possibility nga kaning students can get a high scores even if he does not know anything about the test. Another rule is rule number 3. Avoid long sentences as these tend to be true. You should keep the sentence short. For example, instances ani is kana bitong magnata exam kung asay makita nato nga taas nga sentence, ang ato yung mindset is mao na ni siya sakto nga answer kay taas man. Mao na atong permihuna-hunaon nga ay mo among answer kay kani kay taas. Munang kinahanglan in constructing this type of test, dapat keep it short, yun keep the sentence short. Rule number 4. Avoid trick statements with some minor misleading word or spelling anomaly, misplaced phrases, and etc. Why? For example, The Raven was written by Edgar Allan Poe. Kung kani nga story na discuss ninyo, then ang students familiar or na kaibaw sa content sa story, of course, matik na nang mahibawan kung ang kaning imong question or test is true or false kay kung maggamit kag mga trick statement or mag-base ra ka sa mga wrong spelling nga nimo or imong mga phrases imong i-misplace nimo ang mga phrases or mahibaw na din sa students nga kani nga sentence ay sayop ni false ni siya kay ang spelling sa Allen or niya spelling sa po ana kana wrong siya. So ang students makadetermine na dayon if the questions or the test is false kung imuhang gamiton og mga trick nga statements. Another rule number 5, avoid quoting verbatim from reference materials or textbook. Dapat imong likayan ang pagkuha og mga kanabitong phrases or mga sentences, long sentences nga gikan sa textbooks or mga reference materials kay it sends the wrong signals man to the students that is necessary to memorize the textbook word for word kay imbis na ilahang i-understand ang naa sa textbook or written in the textbook, mas ilahang memorization word by word, dili nila i-understand bitaw kung unsay naa or nakapaloob sa textbook. Mas pilion nila ang sag-uhon na lang kay man sila nga kani nga teacher mas prefer nga magkuha na lang mga words sa usa ka textbook. Then rule number 6, avoid specific determiners or give away qualifiers. For example, sa false, ang imuhang mga gamiton nga words is never, no, all, or always. So, ang students, makadetermine na gid siya nga kanang false ni siya kay nay mga never, no, and so on. Sa true sad na ay makasuwat frequently, some, often, sometimes, generally. So, this word usually should be avoided. For example, kani executives usually suffer from hyperacidity. So the statement tends to be correct since the word usually leads to the answer. Then rule number 7, with a true or false question, avoid a grossly disproportionate number of either true or false. Same as in the picture. Dapat dili bitaw nimo tagan og signal or disproportionate number ang kanang imuhang mga test items, like kanang daghan ang false, gamay ra ang true, or daghan ang true, gamay ra ang false, or imo siyang butangan og brag hints like TF, true false imong mga test items, dapat imong ni siyang i-avoid. And this is rule number 7. And the last rule is to avoid double negatives. This make test item unclear, and definitely will confuse the students. Mas maglibog ang students kung naay mga double negatives. For example, the changes that takes place in early childhood are not unchangeable. The test item simply means that the changes in early childhood are changeable.